Well, we wanted a dialogue, and we've got a dialogue. But I am fascinated by Stefan's Greek love, but we won't talk about that. But I will ask you later about that, and I want to talk more to Peter about his hatred of Liechtenstein. So I know there are people who have some questions, so if I'm just going to start over there.
A question for a panel generally. Talk about Europe being tremendous cultural differences between individuals in the various member states. If that survey was repeated in Brussels, in the EU headquarters, I would think on certain dimensions there'd be no difference at all. They would be much more culturally homogeneous, particularly on the desirability of a, quote, unified Europe. And I think there's actually quite a mismatch between the bureaucrats in Brussels and the population. That's right. Yeah, from, let's say, Finland to Greece. And with all due respect, Peter, I thought you spoke very much like a bureaucrat. I'm sorry, right? That you see the desirability for integration, you want more coordination, you want more centralisation, and so forth. I don't believe the people in Europe believe that. I don't believe that they see that as their solution. I think they see that as the reason for the problem.
See, I don't believe in centralisation. I think my last comment was, I think there needs to be a separation of that. There needs to be just very clear. Let's be a federation, but let's be really clear where Brussels draws, where Brussels ends and where the states begin. And it's sort of there now anyway, but it's just not. It's not proper.
I followed up with a quick one. There's no sanctions. France disobeyed the 3% GDP debt limit for years.
So did Germany.
And so did Germany.
Yeah.
No sanctions. Now in the US that doesn't, in a unified system like Australia, the US that doesn't occur. Right? And unless Europe can get that, will member states give up that other degree of independence?
Oh, so Stefan, yes.
The rule of law doesn't depend just on sanctions. Culture is crucially important, political culture, and that is what I find fascinating, and the Eurozone crisis actually revealed how important cultures are, something that was possible to ignore until now. And you see, even in Australia we have that. And you hear that I'm a new Australian, right? I have an accent, comes from Slovakia. And I can tell you a trivial episode that to me reveals differences in culture. Shortly after I arrived in Australia, I studied at the University of Melbourne. I became a tutor there, I tutored in politics, etc. I was stopped on the street because I love cycling and I couldn't get used to the fact that I should wear a helmet. And I was fine. And the policeman asked me for my name and address. You don't have identity cards or anything. So he relies on my trust. And I thought, why would anyone tell this policeman the real name and the real address?
Because we're not great. That's what we do.
That's what we do. In communist Czechoslovakia, I wouldn't dream of doing it. But I lived in Australia for long enough to do it. But the very fact that I reflected on it is revealing, right? And I shared that experience with my students, and some of them were perplexed that I even had that thought, because they internalized the values of the rule of law so much that they no longer question them. But I put to you that it's different in Greece from Germany, and it's definitely different in Slovakia from Germany. I'm from Slovakia, I know what I'm talking about. And when you mentioned Lagarde list, yeah? There is no way that that could have happened in Germany, that 2 years later, still nothing has been done about these people who we know for sure avoided their duties towards the Greek state, right?
It was lost for most of that time, Stefan, remember, it was lost. It was given to Greece, yes. It was given to the finance minister, who lost it.
Who lost it?
until it was given back to them.
Exactly. He is now losing it.
Things get lost. Now, I know there's a question over there at the end of when Stefan spoke, so I thought, did you want to just follow up on
a question? You're talking about the sluggish German and French economies, and then the failure of the central bank to impose any kind of constraints that Ireland's economy boomed. Isn't that more an argument for some kind of fiscal union, that there is a fiscal union that can somehow regulate those things?
Yes and no. Yes, because only with the fiscal union can a single currency work. But no, because of the massive heterogeneity in terms of the level of economic development, in terms of political cultures, etc. It's just undoable. It's undoable. I mean, the ECB is always going to focus on the large member states. And again, I mean, even if you consider the problems we had in Australia, yeah, that Western Australia, because of the mining boom, is just growing madly, while Victoria is slightly sluggish or whatever, yeah? And the Australian Reserve Bank struggles to negotiate these differences. But we have national taxation. We don't question a massive redistribution of resources. I don't know whether that's feasible, that Germans should accept permanently to subsidize Greece. And in fact, I don't even know whether Greeks would accept the situation whereby they are permanently subsidized by Germans, right? So that is what makes that so pernicious. Because fiscal union is going towards more European unity. I think that we need to step back. But to be honest, I don't know how we can step back. I know it is going to be painful. I fear that there will be a step back that will be more in the form of an implosion, right? That a country like Spain can no longer remain there, or that Berlusconi wins in the elections, an unlikely scenario. Someone like Berlusconi and says, stop you all
Fiscal Union would help Spain rather than hinder it.
Yes.
Wouldn't fiscal union promote that kind of growth in Spain, in Greece?
No. How?
Can I just point out a couple of things?
Okay.
You said that, you know, I mean, to start with, most of the infrastructure that's been built in southern Europe, in Greece and Spain, over the last decade has been funded by the European Union. So, you know,
a lot of it is useless.
It is.
I mean, the trade link between Athens and the airport, I mean, it's the most luxurious trade link, and there is nothing built around it, right?
But it's also, you know, it's also electricity grids, and so, I mean, this is all money, that's northern money anyway. So, you know, you have a system where essentially you've got transfers going on, it's just not under the auspices of transfer union. I mean, if you think about, you know, I mean, the thing about currency is that, like, you know, when times are going good, everybody's really happy. Everyone was really happy in the 2000s. It's only when times go really bad, it's disastrous. I mean, you've got to take the bad and the good. And can I also just point out that you know, things weren't so bad. Things weren't so bad. Well, things weren't so bad in the lead up to the Olympics in Greece. But the Greek government had to pay for it. I mean, if there was a central government, I mean, when we had the Olympics here in Sydney, it was paid for basically by the federal government with the private sector. I mean, if you had an EU government that was, Greece wouldn't have taken Greece over.
But we don't and we can't have it
because the money would have been Greece would have been part of Europe. It would have been funded the Olympics.
We cannot have a central government. Who will run that central government? Germans, Italians, Greeks. We cannot have a central government.
Yeah, and are you talking about disbanding the current governments as well? Like, you sort of sound like you're almost do away with what they've got now and we'll just have the European government. Or are you talking about like a bilateral state and then European Union government yet?
Oh,
or trilateral, quadrilateral,
look, I think essentially the fundamental structure is pretty much okay, but I just think they need to sort out, you know, there needs to be fiscal union. I mean, you know, it's not true that just the federal government here in Australia is responsible for taxes. I mean, state governments still levy charges and things. I mean, anybody who's bought property here knows that, you know, I mean, you know, so state governments do raise taxes, it's not called taxes, but so states in Europe can still raise their own money, and it can go towards things like health and education. I mean, states can look after whatever they negotiate. They can look after health, they can look after policing, they can look after culture, they can look after immigration policies if they want to. But you need a proper, solid federal government that's got authority to do things like tax.
And it has to have political legitimacy. That federal government will never have political legitimacy to put in place massive transfers of permanent, semi-permanent, massive transfers of wealth from one ethnic group, one nation state to another nation. That's just impossible. In Australia, Western Australia feels rich now But I am told that in the past, of course, Victoria subsidized Western Australia. So you even have that kind of exchange. But also, the potential for nationalist mobilization in Western Australia or in Victoria is limited. We are not going to have massive anti-Western Australian sentiments growing in Sydney and in Melbourne. But in Greece we know there are very serious anti-German sentiments that are well founded also historically because of what Greece suffered under the German occupation. There are growing anti-German sentiments in Italy. There are growing anti-German sentiments in Spain. And I love Germany. I don't like them being universally despised and hated across the continent. But this is what is occurring thanks to the
Well, I'm German. So let me say.
I thought that much because you talk about the state of law.
Let me say a little bit also to make some comments because I'm also working in the European Commission. So I find this a fascinating discussion, and I must say. A lot of pro and cons, and I think everybody has a part of what I can understand. There is a serious problem, there's a crisis, and we tend to agree it's not Euro crisis, an invention of London and so on. Even the permanent comments in the Australian or the Euro crisis, I must say, it's a perfect invention to divert from problems you have in the UK. Nobody speaks about the problems of the UK. They're very serious problems.
They are not all taken from Britain. Some of them I wrote, actually,
yes.
about the cousin.
But let me say a few words. I think one important part was to say we are not the United States of America. We have not a central bank which can tackle problems. We are very complicated. We are very complex. We are very diverse. All is true. But if you have seen the declaration of the politicians, and not just the Germans, they say we need more Europe in order to get through the crisis.
But they were told by the Germans that that's what they need and that's what they
Let
want.
me finish.
Of course, we know that.
Let me finish.
Only the Czechs and the Brits have enough courage to say no.
Well, they are adults. No? They can say what they think. But
they will be punished. The Soviet government was punished.
let me finish. No, let me finish. You have a lot of good arguments. I don't say that, but I say most politicians and the political decision process in Europe is we need to get through the crisis. We need to complement the treaty. We need to get closer together. There's no way, and nobody will benefit if you leave the zone. Neither the Euro, neither the European Union. I know the debate in the UK. This is wait. I've waited a long time.
Well, I was invited to speak.
Yes, but
what makes you believe?
What
makes you believe that the new treaty will be adhered to? What makes you believe that any new treaty will be adhered to?
I'm at the level of political definitions of the leaders. The leaders say we need more Europe in order to get through the crisis. We don't need to split, and we don't want to get before the peace process. Second, and we are in a very early stage of integration. You should not forget what we have as a treaty. It is a really beginning. And when I entered the European Commission, that is nearly 30 years ago, I had to write an article, a piece of paper during the exam. First integration and then expansion. Or first expansion and then integration. There's no real answer to this. And the history has shown that nobody could imagine that the eastern part of Europe at a certain moment would become
Thatcher, Margaret Thatcher.
I did not believe the day before the wall of Berlin was falling that it would fall. I did not believe.
Thatcher did, actually.
Yeah, but she was cleverer than me. But I should not believe. But I think this completely out of the order to compare the problems they had in Greece and Spain and Portugal, especially, which is very serious, the youth unemployment, with the Arab Spring. It is completely out of the order. No, you made it.
I didn't want to say it was a
No, you
direct
did it.
connection.
And I think it's completely unacceptable.
All I wanted to say was that then high levels of youth unemployment in particular, historically are catalysts for political change.
Yes, but you compare.
I didn't then say that that was going to happen. All I'm saying is part of the reason for the Arab Spring was the level of economic destituteness felt by many of those states. I then quickly said that that's not going to happen here. All I said was high levels of unemployment create social and political change. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Okay. Last point, and I think you are very well placed to answer is Ireland. Ireland is a very specific case, which has benefited a lot from the transfers which have been given through the cohesion fund, through the regional funds. They had a boom, unexpected. It was prices were sky high, higher than in the housing sector, and then they crashed. Now they are going through a very painful process. What I understand, they are making it, and not like Greece, where they have problems of permanent being supported. They are restructuring their economy. They are getting better to the results. They have still problems, but they are making it. So I do not share your analysis that there is no way having a common currency, they still have to do it, and you cannot improve your economy. It is painful.
I agree with your last point. Ireland has done exceptionally well considering the circumstances. If there is any country that might have a chance to regain competitiveness within the constraints of the Eurozone, it is Ireland. Mind you, these are remarkable. There is a country whose name is just different because of one letter, Iceland.
Yeah.
Iceland.
Yeah.
That didn't have the misfortune of a single European currency. Their banking sector was even more exposed than the Irish banking sector. Their economy was basically far more screwed than the Irish economy. And they defaulted. They had referendum twice. The people said, no, we are not going to pay off the debts that our irresponsible bankers made. And their economy is growing. And they are competitive. In fact, you know, when you said there is no way that Greece can regain competitiveness through devaluation, well, Iceland has just done exactly that. And every case is unique. Every case is unique.
No one will lend Iceland money.
No, but it's a very interesting point. Iceland has just asked a year ago to become member of the European Union.
The Icelandic politicians contemplated that, but the Icelandic people will never endorse that.
But they have
No, not the Icelandic people. You are talking about the political elite.
they have no.
No.
Iceland.
Can someone Google it? Can someone Google it?
Someone Google it, then back. Just Google it, as we say in class, just Google it. Now, I'll just move on, because you know there are some other people's questions. Yes.
They have asked formally for to be admitted.
No, that's
Someone's going to Google it, we'll get the answer. Next.
Okay.
I have asked for a comment from the panel. First of all, thank you for a very good and obviously true exposition of the problem. But many would believe that there is an underlying worldwide problem underlying all the problems and the solution. And that is the exponential increase in the consumers of wealth displacing the producers of wealth. I wrote a paper on this 10 years ago about the escalation of welfare in Australia. It was for the medical journal. It was rejected without even going to peer review. 2 years ago, I was advised to send it to America. It was published straight away in a peer-reviewed international journal. The big problem.
You were right too early.
Yes. At the moment, it was published because the welfare situation here obviously mirrors that in all other Western countries. And in Australia at the moment, 1/3 of Australians are on income support. One in every 5 is on full income support. Now that's bad enough. But sooner, by 2040, 40% of Australians are going to be on full welfare support, which is obviously not sustainable. The unarguable cause is the fact that welfare beneficiaries and low-paid workers are having 5 times more children than the rest of the population. And as far as pensioners are concerned, their children are 5 times more likely also to be on pensions. This is not being addressed except in one country, which is China. At the moment, I'm researching the possibility of paying female welfare beneficiaries childbearing age even up to the average wage not to conceive a child while they're on welfare. But something must be done. In the paper every day.
Good luck with that last one. Good idea.
Yeah. A couple of queries. The first one is, what are the tax rates in Greece that make them so keen to avoid paying more tax?
Oh, it's not that they're necessarily, extremely high. It's just that it's the overall culture, I believe, of just avoiding tax if you can.
So are they? How do they compare to Australian tax?
There's like a professionals in Greece who like professional doctors and lawyers who declare income of under €30,000 a year, for example. So it's not so much that the rates are necessarily onerous, but the belief is that the system is there to be watered, and that then in fact people will not pay their total due of tax. So again, it's not so much that the rate is onerous. I can't tell you off the top of my head, honestly, but it's more that then the system is not trusted and believed in. As in, Stefan was talking about the fact that here in Australia we actually wear bike helmets on both motorbikes and also push bikes, and then if we stop, we actually then tell people our names. In Greece it wouldn't happen. In Greece it wouldn't happen. I was there on family holiday several years ago, and it was, I think, Greece's second attempt to ban smoking in motor vehicles, primarily taxis. So then we hopped into a taxi as a family. We sat there, the front of the dashboard was covered in stickers, basically saying that smoking is prohibited in the vehicle. We started driving, none of us were smoking because of course primarily we're not smokers anyway, and then the taxi driver starts smoking a cigarette in the car. And I happened to ask him, look, just out of curiosity, the stickers say no one is to smoke in a taxi. And he looked at me incredulously and he said, but that's for you, that's not for me. I'm in a taxi 12 hours a day. I've got to smoke. And that's, if I can just finish off on one point, that's the cultural thing in which then I was trying to explain before, which perhaps I didn't explain that well. But that's the kind of issues that exist in the EU, so in the Eurozone itself, is that then there are cultural differences that cannot be eliminated by a law, for example.
We don't want to eliminate it.
Can't be eliminated in any way. So creating laws is one thing, but getting them accepted is another matter altogether.
We don't like the smoking Greeks and taxes, but we would like to have, like we have, diversity, multicultural society, and we are happy.
But it may be too difficult. The only point I was trying to make is that getting the level of coordination, as Peter was talking about, the level of compliance, let's use that term as well too, is very difficult in 17 states that just share a geographic similarity. That's all.
No, that's true.
That's all. It's very difficult.
I can give you another argument for your direction. I know that about 50% of all cars in Greece have a number plate, but are not registered.
Correct. Oh.
So
there's many more issues.
Like this,
there's many more issues. I know, but again, all I'm saying is, yeah, with Greece, with all of its, let's say, uniqueness, all of its uniqueness is accepted in, and then things don't go to plan. How can there be such a significant organisation, structure, super entity, whatever phrase you want to use, that has no penalty clauses and no exit clause? How do you have a club in where then people can join, but no one can leave?
Surely the austerity is the penalty clause.
Well, it's not stated clearly anyway. Yeah.
The European Union exists, so just one word.
Yep.
Exists because member states have given some sovereignty rights to the European Union.
Oh yeah, agreed they have.
On the statistics, member states give statistics to the European Union, to Eurostat, but Eurostat is not empowered to verify the figures.
Yeah, no, that's right.
This we have to change.
Even the Greek law themselves, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, and then I know I want to get behind you as well.
Right. The other night I saw one of the programs on CNCS or Bloomberg or whatever, which went through about their licensing experience, and they've gone through a pretty tough austerity for them. And the fact is about the lowering the currency. What is it then that the EU won't lower its currency, considering Germany is a high exporter, so on one hand they would benefit greatly. So what other factors are keeping the currency high the euro high? If we're talking about lowering the euro for Greece so they can export. So Germany would benefit, but something's stopping that. What do you think it is?
Inflation, fear of inflation.
Import prices basically, in the short term at least, import prices rising dramatically. Now, I don't want to ignore you down the back, yes.
To settle the Icelandic issue.
Oh, so
Just a brief point that
Iceland. So
the
you
Innovation
yes.
Minister apparently has reconsidered the application to the EU in light of a recent public opinion poll. There was an application that's been put aside. Support for such a referendum has been growing in Iceland amongst the political class, and a recent opinion poll showed large majority for scrapping the application. There is also a large majority against EU membership and has been in every poll published in Iceland since 2001.
I talked to the taxi driver in Iceland.
And so,
I wanted to go back to the point about Greeks smoking in cars, I think it's far too easy and far too simplistic to make those cultural definitions and stereotypes and categories. And I'm not denying that they exist; they certainly exist. But political cultures change; they're not static; they're changing all the time. And that was the whole point, and still is the whole point of the European Union in the first place, to consolidate those political cultures of democracy. In my lifetime, quite literally, Greece has gone from dictatorship to democracy, and those changes keep happening. And I think to sit back and say it's too hard, their political culture's too different, they don't get it, they don't pay taxes, it's just too hard, we can't relate to each other, is part of the whole problem in the first place. And it's not until you move beyond those really simplistic, broad, sweeping stereotypes that people can start to move forward. And the danger in saying that we as Germans don't want to subsidise Greeks is how you get back to where Europe was before the European Union.
No, agreed. But again, though, the point was mentioned before, and that word sovereignty, it's very valid. Sovereignty has been ceded by member states to Brussels, absolutely. However, the people are clearly saying that we're not necessarily as comfortable with that as we were once in the past.
But it's the job of governments to lead.
And there are still state realities.
Let's remember that countries had referendums to get into the EU. I mean, no one just said you must join. I mean, there's a referendum.
But too much sovereignty has been ceded through the single currency. And yes, the cultures change, and I am the living testimony to that. I am no longer as Slovak as I was 20 years ago. I pay the fine and I wear the helmet. But the cultures change from within. They don't change when they are under external pressure. Greeks will not become more German when Germans tell them to do so. They can only become more German when they make themselves believe.
But I don't think they're trying to become more German. I think they're just trying to become better. Isn't that what they're all doing?
There's only a couple of minutes to go. I just want to make sure that I give everyone a chance, certainly people who haven't spoken, a chance to talk.
Just a really quick one, just a theoretical one. Someone mentioned by dropping the exchange rate, it will lead to inflation.
Imports become more expensive in the short term.
Not only that, but I mean, to drop the exchange rate, the easiest thing to do so is to further lower the interest rates. The ECB, the European Central Bank, can put it down to 0, and that would also make the currency cheaper in the global markets. At the moment it's at 1 or close to 2% or something,
1.25,
indicating that they will higher it. But so any step in that direction would devalue the currency in the international markets, but it would lead to higher inflation.
Cheaper exports, more expensive imports.
If they started massively buying the bonds from Greece or all these failed states, then the currency would also devalue in global markets, but that would definitely lead to inflation. Right.
Is there anyone else? Because I'm just conscious of the time, and obviously everyone's been great in their participating, but just to make sure everyone has had a chance.
Just a comment about the attitude in Greece, and I think it's unconscionable that Angela Merkel is pictured there with a moustache. The Greeks knew very well that their government was doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. The fact is that they don't pay enough tax. They cannot expect Germans, on the other hand, to say, well, we're going to subsidise you forever and ever. When do the Greeks actually take the bull by the horns and say, yes, we've got a problem and we have to rejig the whole system? They are all responsible.
The power plays in Greece are still being played out. A point I tried to make earlier was that the elites certainly seem to be suffering a lot less than what the general population is. Everyone has a level of culpability, absolutely, but the elites are able to extricate themselves, correct, extricate themselves out of these situations. The person on the street, whether it be in Athens, whether it be in Piraeus, whether it be in Sparta or then in Salonika, is the person who is likely to be unemployed, whose older children are likely to be unemployed, who's not being paid, whose parents' welfare benefits have been cut by 40%. They're the people who suffer most, not the people perhaps more culpable. I'm not saying that then there are people who are like clean skins as such, but certainly the consequences and the repercussions are not being shared equally. As then that happens in most situations as well too. Even in Western societies, particularly with the GFC, right, profits are privatised, losses are socialised. It's the same thing in Greece.
I mean, look, it's absurd though. You could go around in circles. You could say, well, the Greeks don't, they don't pay enough taxes. I mean, but then you could say, well, the Germans have got all their money in tax havens. I mean, you can go on about like this forever and start blaming other people. But essentially, you've either got to accept that you want to be part of a union or not. I mean, there was a story that I read in the Australian actually around about 18 months ago that was something on the headline was the great sucking sound coming from Victoria, which was all about basically how Western Australia and Queensland resent the fact that Victoria is just, is not contributing enough to the Commonwealth. I mean, it's just absurd. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to say, okay, let Victoria will just be on its own country. Western Australia, take your money and drift away to South
But at least there is, in Australia, I was going to say, at least in Australia though, there is a single national election.
And
that everyone participates.
And we don't challenge the legitimacy of the national government, we accept it. You see, this is pernicious about the single currency. I lived in Europe, I lived in Germany in fact for 6 years, and I had a Greek girlfriend.
We were
not exposed to any hostility by Germans. This is what I find so tragic, that the single currency that was meant to bring those nations closer together really is pulling them apart, and I wouldn't want to live as a Greek in Germany now and be exposed to reckless remarks about Greeks who don't pay taxes. Before the single currency was introduced, this was not a problem for Germany.
But it's only some Germans.
No, it's still not a problem.
You can't do these blankets. There's a lot of people in Germany who, of course, are very committed to the EU. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of Greeks who live in Germany who are quite happy with it. There's lots of Germans who are quite happy with it. There are lots of Greeks who probably like it. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
All right.
To go and do.
Thank you.
You've got to
fantastic dialogue. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much. Stefan, and obviously Peter in the AIIA, and of course the entire conference itself. I think it was a fantastic afternoon. We haven't